Whenever a YouTuber aspires towards transitioning to mainstream storytelling, I always root for it. It takes a lot of courage to not be dependent on certainties as a YouTuber, which a lot of the times has to do with the subscriber base and their loyal support towards your uploads. This often makes creators reach this autopilot mode of uploading content, following similar beats that they know their audience loves, and often stagnating creatively, especially if you are doing something like skits, which were hugely popular in the early days of YouTube, especially if I were to think about the era from 2015 to 2018. So when a Bhuvan goes from his popular handheld phone camera skits to wanting to produce and act in his own show that makes him arrive in the big leagues, I really back it. Now even transitioning to roles merely as a talent versus taking the heavy load of scripting and mounting a project altogether, much like Prajakta Kohli in the industry today. However, whenever they do appear in movies or shows, I think most YouTube reviewers are soft in their analysis of their product because they commend and respect the journey versus objectively seeing the product in a vacuum. This observation has also made me conclude that the audience is not interested in the journey, the trials and tribulations you have faced off camera. If the product and storytelling itself is weak, it will be called out and not withstand, no matter how much of a loyal audience or subscriber base you may have. And these are exactly the conflicting feelings I had while watching the first episode of Ekaki Chapter 1, directed and starring Ashish Chanchlani and a bunch of creators turned actors. Ashish has gone through the ringer to make this project a reality. This is a man who was insanely popular when I started this YouTube channel as well. When this space had a trending page that actually meant something, he would feature in it consistently. And while for me personally the humor was just not my cup of tea, I respected the hustle and understand why he wanted to pivot to do bigger projects and challenge himself as a creator. Ekaki is that step for Ashish, but I have to be honest that I had sensed the warning signs of at least the humor when I first watched the trailer. I know this is early days and this will essentially be thoughts of the start of this journey, so please bear in mind that I'm genuinely hoping that this shapes up to be something compelling. The first episode of the series presents Ashish playing the role of Karthik and his gang of friends headed for what seems like a weekend getaway to Ambora. This establishment is owned by Karthik's mama, and as the night progresses and the friends start partying, ominous and odd activities start to happen. Specifically noticed first by Akash Dudeja's character, the lore behind why these events are happening, and specifically the house and its origins forms the basic beats of the first episode. I have to say this right off the bat, but the humor is just not for me personally. I know Ashish, when sitting with the Men of Culture podcast, had communicated on he has aspirations to try something new, but he also understands in not wanting to alienate his core audience completely by doing something completely left of field. I think this is a huge trap of popularity though, because you are not inherently making the creative decision, but being dictated by the expectations of a loyal subscriber base. The comedic lines in the first episode made me feel like I was watching YouTube videos from a decade ago, something that I understand may be something Ashish's audience may love, but it for me personally is outdated and sometimes really gets on my nerves. The writing and the crux of the gags are always associated with insults, and I understand that banter between friends is laced with jabs at each other personalities and appearances, but the rate at which the characters in the first episode were insulting each other, the incessant manner in which they were shouting at one another during the car ride, and the eventual stay had me genuinely exhausted in the first few minutes. The episode is around 35 minutes long, and I could not help but be shocked on how slowly time was passing through these comedic gags. There is also a template in the writing which is very Bollywood coded that we often call out Hindi cinema for. Pop culture references used as insults. Gags would include lines like छत पे बैठ के छैया छैया, सविता भाभी के भक्त, तारदेव के टेलर स्विफ्ट and नाला सुपारा के रॉकी रंधावा. A lot of it feels forced rather than an organic conversation among friends, almost desperate to perform for the audience to make them laugh through quips versus investing in the relationship among the friends. It felt that Ashish and the team really thought of how many creative insults they can fit in a small duration of time versus actually providing us an insight on who these people are. That's the scary part. 35 minutes had passed in the first episode and I don't really know these characters beyond them being caricatures. One being a nerd, one being a stoner, and the other one being perpetually horny. But who are they? Grisham Navani is probably the only performance where I felt like there was a realism and groundedness in his presence in front of camera. Again, I understand that humor is subjective and maybe I've just grown older, but even Ashish's audience has grown older, which makes me wonder whether they are still finding these beats funny and whether Ashish is still trying to cater to the young audience because of which he became popular, not realizing that they have evolved into becoming full-grown adults too, who may have well, had a straight face through most of the juvenile humor, especially when so many of the gags involved squeezing one's nipples, cleavage jokes, painting being misheard as panty, and fondling with friends while peeing together. The humor is just not for me personally, and I would love to know from the audience if they beg to differ. What I do love about the first episode is when it genuinely takes itself seriously. When the jabs and insults end, the story needs an anchor to pull you into the tale of Ekaki, is where I genuinely became curious about the lore behind this house that the friends visit. There were very interesting sound design choices made while trying to shed light on the POV of a supposed entity and its observations of the friends. Even though I was really getting uncomfortable with the pitch of Akash's performance specifically during the comedic sequences, it's when he gets drawn towards an ominous energy where he really sold it for me. The reaction shots of what may be looming around the corner was effectively done, making me also conclude that the only reason I will be tuning in again to chapter 2 is because I'm interested on how Ashish integrates and executes the horror. I must say on a side note though that I love the poster designs and the fact that Ashish gave the cast individual character posters, and I thought the introduction to essentially what will be Ashish's production house called ACB Studios was very slick and cool. I realized very clearly, very fast, that the beats of humor and the pitch of performances is just not for me personally. I also hope for Ashish to have an evolution from that, because there will be judgment, criticism, and an analysis of his work outside of the bubble of his loyal subscriber base, all of whom will not have context to his history, his brand of humor, and journey as a creator. I really hope for the horror origins of this show to become the clincher to interest audiences back for several chapters ahead, because if that crumbles or is generic, many will wonder whether the wait for Ekaki all these years was worth it or not. And that was a video, guys. Write down in the comments below what you thought about the first episode of Ekaki. Please don't forget to follow me on Instagram. The handle's right in front of you. Follow me at JammyPants4. Also, please support us by smashing the like button and subscribing to our channel for weekly content ahead. Thank you for watching.